What would you do if your 12-year-old son walked into school with medical braids and walked out nearly bald, humiliated, and silenced? This isn't fiction. It happened to Malik Jones, a quiet black boy with alopecia, and it shook a nation. What started as a school dress code violation exploded into a national reckoning on race, dignity, and power in America's classrooms. Stay with us, because what Malik's family did next changed more than policy. It changed everything. The clippers buzzed like a chainsaw in a silent chapel. And for 12-year-old Malik Jones, each pass across his scalp felt like more than just hair being taken. It was dignity being stripped under fluorescent lights. He had come to school that morning, hoping to blend in, head lowered beneath a navy hoodie, carefully braided extensions concealing the patchy scars alopecia had left behind. For Malik, those braids were armor. Identity. Normalcy in a world that made black boys feel too visible, yet unseen. Mr. Caro, a 46-year-old teacher known for his obsession with order, spotted Malik from across the classroom. To him, Malik's hair was not self-expression but a challenge. The dress code was scripture, and Malik's presence, his silence, his refusal to conform, was a threat to control. That morning's grooming crackdown didn't erupt spontaneously. It was the product of an education system increasingly shaped by zero-tolerance policies, many of which punish cultural identity under the language of uniformity. In practice, they create a hierarchy of what is considered acceptable and who is allowed to belong. What followed wasn't a mistake. It was an act of compliance weaponized as cruelty. And when Malik's braids landed on the nurse's floor tile by tile, they weren't the only thing unraveling. The school's quiet abuse of power had gone unchecked for years, but this time they picked the wrong kid, and Malik's story was about to ignite something much bigger than a school scandal. By the time Malik's father arrived at Haven Ridge Middle School, the damage had already been done. The clippers were back in the nurse's cabinet, the floor swept clean of the braids that once cloaked his son's vulnerability. But Malik, 12 years old, quiet, always drawing, sat curled in the nurse's chair like a shattered figurine, hoodie pulled over his now bare head. He hadn't said a word, not to the nurse, not to the principal, not even to his dad. Dorian Jones crouched beside his son, brushing a trembling hand against the boy's shoulder. "Malik," he said softly, "talk to me, son." Malik didn't move. His breathing was shallow, his eyes fixed on the floor. The nurse, red-eyed and guilt-ridden, stood silent by the door, unsure what to say. She'd followed orders, but something about this felt wrong from the start. And now it was irreversible. At district headquarters, the incident was already being framed. The story wasn't about a child with a medical exemption being humiliated. It was about a teacher enforcing dress code policy, a misunderstanding, a procedural gray area. Officials quietly issued a one-day suspension for Mr. Caro and crafted a generic statement for press inquiries. "We are investigating an incident involving enforcement of grooming policy. No further comment at this time." Behind closed doors, Superintendent Carlisle Daniels, no relation, called a damage control meeting. Flanked by the district's legal counsel and PR chief, he weighed the fallout. "There's no footage of the actual haircut," the lawyer pointed out. "The only video online is a hallway clip, blurred, no sound, partial view." Carlisle nodded slowly. "Then, that's what we lean into. Policy confusion, no intent to harm, emphasize the student's privacy." The statement drafted that day used the word "unfortunate" 4 times. It never once mentioned Malik by name, not his condition, not his trauma. Not the fact that he'd sat in silence for hours, arms around his knees, refusing food, speech, or touch. At home that night, Dorian tried everything. Hot cocoa, a favorite comic book. Even one of Malik's unfinished sketches found stuffed in the side pocket of his backpack. A raven mid-flight, wings wide, drawn with such grace it nearly made Dorian cry. But Malik barely blinked. He didn't eat, didn't draw, didn't respond. This wasn't just shame. It was emotional shutdown, the kind trauma specialists warn about when a child loses bodily autonomy. And for a black boy with alopecia, already living at the margins of understanding, this wasn't about hair. It was about being exposed, reduced, rendered voiceless in front of people who'd never seen him for who he really was. Across the city, the clip Maya posted continued to gain traction. Tens of thousands of views poured in overnight. Comments ranged from empathy to outrage to the usual dismissive voices. It's just a haircut. He should follow the rules like everyone else. Why make this about race? But Malik's silence told a deeper story, one the algorithms couldn't ignore for long. What began as a dress code incident was becoming something else, an unintentional mirror held up to a broken system. And while administrators scrambled to manage optics, Malik's pain was already being shaped into a movement neither his school nor the district could contain for much longer. The silence in Captain Naomi Ellis's transport cabin was deeper than the ocean she'd just flown over. After 20 years of military service, she'd endured everything from insurgent ambushes to classified threat briefings. But nothing had gutted her like the 30-second clip her husband sent. The grainy footage of their son, Malik, being led down a school hallway, head bowed, fear in every inch of his small frame. The message from Dorian had been short. Naomi, they shaved his head. He hasn't spoken. I don't know what to do. She didn't respond with words. She requested emergency family leave within the hour. Her superior officer didn't ask for details. One look at her face told him everything. 24 hours later, Naomi landed at Kennedy International. She didn't go home. She went straight to Haven Ridge Middle School, still wearing her dress uniform, bars shining, boots polished, exhaustion masked by adrenaline and fury. Inside the front office, the secretary glanced up and immediately froze. Naomi's posture, her controlled breathing, her quiet presence, it wasn't just military discipline. It was the arrival of consequence. The quiet after the bomb, not before. I'm here to speak with Principal Crane, Naomi said evenly. Principal Elijah Crane had spent the weekend managing press emails, staff anxiety, and a legal review that made it clear the district's misunderstanding was fast becoming a lawsuit. When Naomi walked into his office unannounced, his mouth tightened. Mrs. Ellis, Captain, she corrected. Let's not pretend we don't know who I am. He gestured to the chair in front of his desk, but Naomi remained standing. You've had 3 days to reach out. You didn't. You let my son be publicly humiliated, silenced, and ignored. You've minimized the trauma inflicted on him by one of your own. Crane cleared his throat. Mr. Caro has been disciplined. A 1-day suspension is not discipline. That's a lunch break. She dropped a folder onto his desk. Inside were medical records, a dated letter confirming Malik's alopecia diagnosis, and a printed copy of the school's email acknowledging the hair exemption filed months ago. You had this on file, she said, and still, your staff acted as if Malik's hair was a choice. Crane scanned the documents, stalling. We're conducting a full review. While my son still hasn't spoken, Naomi snapped. Do you understand what psychological trauma looks like in a child this age? Because I do. I've seen it in war zones. I've seen it in displaced refugee camps. And I've seen it in kids who are stripped of dignity in front of their peers. Crane swallowed. We're working to resolve. No, you're working to protect your liability, she cut in. That ends today. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. You'll be hearing from our attorney and the media. I'm not here as a soldier. I'm here as a mother. And if you think I won't burn this district to the ground to rebuild it for the children you failed, you haven't been paying attention." Naomi didn't slam the door. She didn't need to. The room shook anyway. Later that night, in their living room filled with shadows and silence, Malik looked up at her for the first time. His voice, hoarse and fragile, barely carried across the room. "You came," he whispered. Naomi knelt beside him. "Always," she replied. What Malik didn't know was that she hadn't just come home. She'd declared war, and her battlefield was justice. The first wave of outrage came fast, local. The second went viral. By Monday morning, the clip Maya Brooks had uploaded, 35 seconds of shaky hallway footage showing Malik Jones being dragged toward the nurse's office, had racked up over 500,000 views. By Wednesday, it had passed 2 million. No audio, no context. Just a 12-year-old boy in visible distress, his hair hidden under a hood moments before being taken from him. Comment threads exploded. Some called it child abuse. Others said it was about time someone enforced the rules. But among black parents, especially those raising children with textured or medically sensitive hair, the message rang painfully familiar. "This isn't about a haircut," one comment read, pinned by the uploader. "It's about who gets to decide what's acceptable and who gets punished for being different." Naomi Ellis saw the growing firestorm as both fuel and opportunity. The same morning the clip trended nationally, she began compiling stories. An anonymous inbox, a call for testimonies. Within 48 hours, she had over 70 messages from families around the country. Stories of children sent home for afros, braids, beads. Girls told their hair was distracting. Boys forced to cut locks or face suspension. Patterns began to emerge, clear, consistent, and damning. Meanwhile, Malik remained at home, still withdrawn, but beginning to sketch again. His drawings were sharper now, less whimsical, more symbolic. One showed a pair of scissors slicing a storm cloud in half. Another, a child with a bald head holding a flaming pencil. Naomi didn't push him to speak. She knew healing was nonlinear, but the drawing spoke louder than words. Across town, Principal Crane's office was in crisis mode. Emails flooded in. The district's official page was inundated with backlash. Activist organizations reached out. Civil rights attorneys issued open letters. Students at Haven Ridge Middle walked out during homeroom, holding signs that read, "Let us be seen," and "Hair is not a disruption." Even the local NAACP chapter issued a statement calling for a full investigation and public apology. What turned this into more than a flash-in-the-pan controversy was the documentation Naomi had quietly prepared. She'd saved every email, every signed form, every doctor's note. And with the help of Dorian, who now spent his nights fielding press inquiries and organizing call logs, she turned her kitchen table into a legal war room. Maya's sister, Kiara, an education major at a nearby college, stepped in with media savvy. She organized a hashtag campaign, #Hands Off Our Kids. The tag trended on TikTok and Instagram within hours, especially after a well-known celebrity reposted Malik's sketch with the caption, "This is what trauma looks like. This is what resistance becomes." Soon, other students came forward. One 8th grader recalled how Mr. Caro had made her remove a head wrap during a migraine. A biracial 6th grader named Jalen said the same teacher had commented that his curls were too wild for a learning environment. The pattern was undeniable, but it didn't end with Haven Ridge. A deeper search revealed that several districts across the state had been sued, or quietly settled cases, where dress code enforcement disproportionately affected black students. Despite growing protections like the Crown Act in several U.S. states, which prohibited hair discrimination based on race or culture, loopholes remained in school policies. Malik's school, located in a state where the law hadn't yet passed, had used one of those very loopholes. Naomi made sure legislators knew it. By the end of the week, she'd scheduled meetings with both local officials and education board members. She drafted a proposal for a new policy framework. Clearer guidelines on cultural and medical hair exemptions, mandatory training for school staff on implicit bias, and an anonymous reporting system for students who felt targeted. Inside the district headquarters, pressure mounted. Emails turned to calls. Calls turned into threats of legal action. Then came the interviews, morning shows, podcast appearances, online panels. Naomi, always composed, always direct, refused to center herself in the story. "This isn't about me," she said on a national live stream. "This is about how many children have been shamed into silence, how many never told their stories because they thought no one would listen. We're listening now." And across the country, others were too. Malik's story had crossed the threshold of virality. It had become a reckoning, a lens through which thousands were re-examining school culture, race, authority, and childhood dignity. And though Naomi never asked for a movement, one had found her. Fueled by grief, built on truth, and driven by the quiet power of a child who had simply wanted to be left alone. By the time the courthouse doors opened on the first day of Jones versus Haven Ridge School District, the line outside wrapped around the block. Protesters, parents, and journalists stood shoulder to shoulder beneath gray morning skies, holding umbrellas and hand-painted signs. "Protect our kids." "Crown, act now." "Justice for Malik." Inside, the courtroom was packed. Naomi Ellis sat beside her husband, Dorian, and their son, Malik, now 13, wrapped in a deep blue scarf that matched his eyes. He hadn't returned to school since the incident. He wasn't ready. But he was ready for this. Their attorney, Sasha Kimball, stood at the front of the room, her voice steady and commanding. A civil rights lawyer known for dismantling discriminatory school practices across the country, Sasha opened with a statement that silenced the room. "This case is not about a haircut. It's about power. A child's voice ignored. A parent's consent bypassed. A school system that chose control over compassion." On the defense side sat Principal Crane, the district's general counsel, and Mr. Caro, flanked by two attorneys from a high-powered law firm retained by the school board. Their expressions ranged from impassive to defensive. The school's initial defense was procedural. They argued Malik's exemption was not sufficiently flagged in the system, that Mr. Caro believed he had administrative authority, and that no malice was intended. They used words like miscommunication, oversight, disciplinary process. But none of that held against the facts. Naomi had brought a binder thick with documentation, doctor's notes, email chains, time-stamped filing receipts. One entry proved Malik's exemption had been uploaded to the district portal 4 months prior. Another showed Principal Crane's acknowledgement of the policy during a staff-wide email briefing 2 weeks before the incident. But the most powerful testimony came from Malik. The court had arranged accommodations to make it easier for him to testify. A screen was placed between him and Mr. Caro. A child advocate sat beside him. But Malik didn't need help. His voice, soft at first, grew stronger with each word. "I didn't want to be seen," he said, eyes on the floor. "That's why I wore the braids. They made me feel like I was still myself, even when the spots got worse." Sasha asked gently, "Did you tell your teacher about your condition?" "I tried," Malik said. "He didn't care. He said it was just hair and rules were rules." "And how did that make you feel?" Malik hesitated. Like I didn't matter, like if I disappeared, no one would notice. The room fell into a stunned silence. Even the stenographer wiped away tears. Later that day, Mr. Caro took the stand. His tone was clipped, formal. He reiterated policy. He stressed procedure. He insisted he acted in good faith. But under cross-examination, Sasha presented a message from a staff group Chad obtained through legal discovery. It was sent the morning of the incident. Caro: the Ellis kid is pushing my limits again. Time to make sure he doesn't think he's exempt from rules just because his mom's in uniform. Caro's attorney objected, citing context. But the damage was done. Outside the courtroom, national media outlets picked up the quote. Within hours, it was trending on every platform. Sasha continued her case with expert witnesses. Psychologists who testified about the lasting impact of forced grooming on children with medical or racialized identities. Education specialists who explained how cultural bias hides behind neutral policies. And even a forensic data analyst who confirmed the district's server logs were altered the day after the incident. By week's end, it was clear the trial was no longer just about Malik. It was about every child who'd been punished for looking different, every caregiver who had to choose between speaking up or risking retaliation, every educator who'd been told to follow policy, even when it went against their conscience. The final day of trial, Sasha closed with quiet force. Malik Jones didn't walk into that school defiant. He walked in protected. The people meant to shield him chose to strip him down instead. His dignity, his silence, his sense of safety. And now they ask us to call it a mistake. She stepped aside and gestured toward Malik, who sat still watching. We ask you to call it what it truly was. A violation of rights, of trust, of humanity. The jury deliberated for 5 hours. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous. The district, Principal Crane, and Mr. Caro were found liable on all counts: negligence, civil rights violations, and emotional distress. Malik was awarded $1.5 million in damages, but the number wasn't the headline. It was the message. That a child's identity, his medical truth, his cultural expression, was not a disruption, and that when institutions forget that, they will be held accountable. The verdict landed like a thunderclap. Within 24 hours, the school district's phone lines were jammed, its email servers overloaded. Media vans circled the administration building like sharks. But behind the headlines, something more permanent was breaking. The quiet, insulated machinery that had protected people like Mr. Caro for years. Superintendent Avery Brandt issued a public statement the morning after the verdict. The language was polished. We take this outcome seriously. The district is committed to reflection, learning, and healing. But those close to the case knew better. It wasn't reflection, it was fallout control. That same day, 3 longtime board members abruptly resigned, citing personal health and family matters. Leaked internal memos later showed they had approved legal support for Caro months prior, even after earlier complaints surfaced about his conduct. An independent audit, commissioned under pressure from state officials, revealed even more. The district had quietly paid settlements in 4 other student discrimination cases over the past 6 years. None had been publicly acknowledged. All involved students of color. All involved dress code infractions. The press called it the pattern. But for Naomi Ellis, none of it came as a surprise. She and Dorian declined all settlement offers that included non-disclosure agreements. They were clear. This fight wasn't just for Malik. It was for every kid who had been shamed, silenced, or erased. The media appearances continued, but Naomi remained measured. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. Her presence, calm, steady, full of earned authority, made the message hit harder. "We don't need performative apologies," she said on national television. "We need structural repair. That means policy changes, that means consequences. That means accountability, not just for what happened, but for how long it was allowed to happen." Her call was answered. Under pressure from advocacy groups, state lawmakers introduced emergency legislation. The Ellis Education Equity Act proposed 3 immediate reforms for public schools. 1. Mandatory cultural sensitivity training for all educators, administrators, and staff. 2. Legal protections for students with documented medical or cultural exemptions, including hair-related conditions like alopecia. 3. Whistleblower protections for teachers and nurses who report potential abuses without fear of retaliation. At the local level, Haven Ridge Middle School underwent sweeping changes. Mr. Caro was permanently barred from working in any public education role. Principal Crane stepped down 2 weeks after the verdict. The interim principal, Jason Broder, a veteran teacher known for centering student voice and restorative discipline. He wasted no time. The school's dress code was rewritten from the ground up, with input from students, parents, and cultural consultants. Out went vague phrases like neat, conservative, and non-distracting. In came clear, inclusive language that protected cultural expression and medical needs. A new advisory council was formed, half parents, half students, with monthly open forums to review discipline data, flag trends, and suggest reforms. One of their first initiatives was a mural project. Local artists and students collaborated to turn the once blank hallway near the nurse's office into a vivid timeline of justice, from protest to policy, from silence to expression. Malik visited during the final week of the school year. He didn't stay long, just long enough to walk that hallway and see the final panel. A boy with a bald head, standing tall, surrounded by a rising sun. He didn't say much, just "that's me" under his breath. Naomi heard it, and it was enough. The institutions that once ignored Malik had been forced to rebuild in his name. And though the scars of what happened couldn't be erased, the impact of his courage was now written into the walls of the place that once failed him. It didn't happen overnight. Healing rarely does. In the weeks after the trial, Malik Jones still struggled with sleep. Certain sounds, a buzzing razor, hallway footsteps, even raised voices on TV, brought sudden flashes of fear. But there was progress, small and real. He returned to sketching, then painting, then talking again, slowly at first, cautiously. One afternoon he stood in the family garage-turned-art studio, staring at a blank canvas. His hand hovered with a brush for almost 10 minutes before making the first stroke. What emerged wasn't perfect, but it was alive, bright, angular, loud in color, even if Malik himself remained quiet. That canvas became the centerpiece of an exhibition 2 months later. Uncut, Stories of Survival. Organized by Naomi and a coalition of community educators and artists, the pop-up gallery displayed works by young people who had experienced trauma inside school systems. Some used paint, others photography. A few sculpted fragments of metal or fabric into abstract forms. The opening night was packed. Teachers, parents, city officials, even a few reporters showed up. But it wasn't about press. It was about reclaiming space. Malik's piece, refused, not removed, was displayed near the entrance. It featured a faceless figure standing in the middle of a storm, hair swirling like roots into the sky. Beneath it, he'd written a single line, "I am not what you tried to take from me." That night, for the first time since the haircut, Malik stood beside his art and spoke to a stranger. "It's about more than me," he said. The movement had grown far beyond his story. Dozens of states were reviewing their school grooming and dress code policies. Civil rights organizations use the Jones case as a case study in racial bias training for educators. And Malik, unknowingly, had become a symbol of dignity, of resistance, of survival. But Naomi knew they had to do more than symbol build. Together with Dorian, she founded the Scarf Project, a nonprofit dedicated to helping children who experience institutional trauma in schools. It offered 3 things: legal advocacy, creative healing programs, and family support resources. Within 6 months, they had chapters in 4 cities and dozens of volunteers, including teachers who had left the schools in protest of discriminatory systems. The name came from Malik's headscarf, the deep blue one he wore the day he testified. It had become a part of his identity, and soon it became a badge of solidarity. Kids around the country started wearing scarves and posting their own stories under the hashtag #ScarfStrong. Meanwhile, Maya Brooks, Malik's friend who had posted the original video, launched a podcast called Unbraided, featuring conversations with students of color about school, identity, and healing. Her first guest was Malik. They didn't talk about the trial. They talked about drawing, friendship, favorite snacks. It was light, but powerful. Sometimes, Maya said on the podcast, the most radical thing we can do is just tell our stories and let them stand. As for Malik, he didn't return to Haven Ridge. His family opted for an arts-based charter school across town, one that allowed him to dress how he wanted and express himself freely. He still wore scarves some days. Other days he let his head show. Either way, it was his choice. That was the legacy, not revenge, not retribution, but the return of agency, of voice. Because what they took from Malik wasn't just hair, it was safety, trust, self-definition. And what he built in its place was a blueprint for healing, for reform, for every child who still walks those halls hoping to be seen. A year after that day in the nurse's office, Malik Jones stood quietly at the steps of the state capitol, a sketchpad tucked under one arm. Around him, families gathered, some holding signs, others holding hands. Inside, lawmakers debated the final provisions of the Student Dignity and Expression Act, legislation born from Malik's story and shaped by voices like his. He didn't speak at the podium that day. He didn't need to. The governor's office had already issued a statement crediting Malik and his family for inspiring a necessary reckoning in education policy. The new law would require schools to respect medical hair exemptions, establish clearer cultural protections, and include student voices in code enforcement reviews. Later that evening, back home, Malik flipped open his sketchpad and began to draw, not as therapy, not as resistance, just as a boy doing what he loved. This time, it was a quiet classroom. Sunlight through windows. A teacher smiling. A kid with locks laughing in the back. No fear, no tension. He titled the piece, How It Should Be. Naomi watched from the kitchen, her hand on Dorian's shoulder. They didn't interrupt. They didn't advise. They simply let him be. Because that, too, was justice, letting a child exist without explanation. Malik's story wasn't perfect justice. No verdict, no law could undo what had been taken. But what he and his family built in its place, awareness, accountability, art, advocacy, was something stronger than revenge. It was transformation. Not just of policy, but of possibility. And in that transformation, other children found permission to stand taller, speak louder, and reclaim what had once been denied. Not erased, redrawn.